Russell Wilson is the quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks. He's played in a couple Super Bowls and he's won one of them. He was a Christian. He was being interviewed at a church recently. And in that interview, he was talking about him and his girlfriend and their life together. And he said, we want to do this. We want to not have sex until we get married. When the entertainment world heard that, it just blew up. The reactions of people are just, that's the dumbest thing we've ever heard of. They're stupid. He's gay. They're not going to make it. And it's amazing to me to see something that used to be celebrated as a virtue is now just being openly mocked in our country. And I'll tell you what, it takes a lot of courage and strength to live for God today. I mean, just even to say that I'm going to do things God's way brings the chance of being ridiculed in our country. As we finish this series today, we've been going through the book of Joshua. And there are certain themes that just keep coming up as we've been doing this. Be courageous. Trust God. Be strong. And I think today in our world, a world that's dramatically changing, followers of Jesus, we've got to be strong. And so we're going to look at some principles. We're going to, as we finish this series. And so if you have a Bible, turn to Joshua chapter 14. If you don't have a Bible, there should be one of the chairs in front of you. Joshua 14 is on page 161. You can find it in your phone or your tablet. Or if you have your own Bible, Joshua is kind of toward the beginning after the books of Numbers, Deuteronomy, and then Joshua. Joshua 14, I'll give you the background as you're looking that up. The nation of Israel left Egypt. They crossed through the Red Sea, and they went up to the promised land. They got to the Jordan River, and Moses sent 12 spies into the land. When they got into the land, they were supposed to kind of see what it was like. They came back, and they gave a report to the people. And the report was basically this. It's a hard place. The people are huge. The cities are fortified. It's difficult. And 10 of the spies said, there's no way. They're just too big, they're too strong for us. But 2 of the spies came back and said, yeah, it's big, it's bad, but God is bigger. And those 2 spies were Joshua, who is now the leader of the nation of Israel, and another guy whose name was Caleb. Well, because Israel didn't trust God, he said, okay, you're going to go spend 40 years wandering in the desert. And at the end of that 40 years, they came back, and Joshua leads them. The nation goes, and they take over the land. All the big places are taken care of, but there's still pockets of resistance. And after 5 years of that, a man named Caleb, the same guy, he goes to Joshua and says, okay, most of the stuff is done. We still have things that need to happen, but that spot right there, I want it. And what we're going to learn is that we need to be strong. First of all, we need to be strong for the next generation. Watch what Caleb says in Joshua 14. I'll start reading with verse 6. Now the men of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, you know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea, about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my brothers who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt with fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So on that day Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Caleb goes to Joshua and first of all says, I brought back a report according to my convictions. I looked through the land just like the rest of the spies did. I saw the dangers. I saw the difficulties there, but I brought it back and said, we can do this because God is on our side. He is so much bigger than all of our obstacles. And as we read about Caleb in Joshua 14, what we see is 3 different times it says Caleb followed God wholeheartedly. It wasn't this kind of on the side when it feels good. It was all the time. He served God with everything that he had. And at this point in his life, he's 85, he says, I want to claim the promise that was given to me. I've done my responsibility with the nation as a whole. Now, as I want to make sure that my children and my grandchildren, that they're taken care of. I want to take the land that was promised to me as an inheritance. And you know what? I believe that that's where we are as a church. I think a lot of you like this church, and that's great. But if you're already a Christian, are you thinking beyond yourself? Are you concerned about the people around here who need to know about Jesus Christ? Are you concerned about what kind of church we need to become so that your children, so that your grandchildren can learn about Jesus Christ? That's a responsibility that we have. In Psalm 78, Asaph, he writes this song about the responsibility we have. Look how many times he mentions children and grandchildren in this psalm. The song says this, "Oh, my people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter hidden things, things from of old, what we have heard and known, what our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power, and the wonders he has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our forefathers to teach their children, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. Then they would put their trust in God, would not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands. They would not be like their forefathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation whose hearts were not loyal to God, whose spirits were not faithful to him." Asaph writes this psalm and says, you know our history. You know the things that God has done for us. And you know that in our history, there have been times where generations have not followed God. They've not done the stuff that he's told us to do. But instead, we need to be different. We need to be the generation that tells our kids, that tells our grandkids how wonderful God is. Reminds them of the things he's done and reminds them it's not just that he did that stuff in the past, he's living and active today. You notice how much responsibility lies with us to teach the kids and the grandkids. So I want you to do this morning. If you have a picture of your kids, your grandkids on your phone or in your wallet or something like that, pull that out. Just pull it out. If you got a picture in there, I don't know where you carry it. Obviously, if you're a grandparent, you've got a picture somewhere. If you don't have it on you, you're going to be in lots of trouble, right? And so pull out that picture, look at your kids, look at your grandkids, phone, wallet, whatever you have. If you don't have any of those things, I'm telling on you. I won't. But picture them in your head. Now, if your children, grandchildren, if they live here, don't you want to have a church that's here that they can grow up in, that they can learn the things about God? If your kids, if your grandkids, if they live a long way away, like halfway across the country, don't you want a church there to provide a place where your kids and your grandkids can learn about God? I mean, isn't that something you want for them? Well, have you ever turned it around and said, you know what, there are people halfway across the country whose kids or grandkids live here in Scottsdale, and they would love for a church to say, here's a place. Here's a place for my kids. Here's a place for my grandkids to learn about God. You know, shouldn't we do that? If we want that for someone else, shouldn't we do that for the people who live here? That's what God has called us to do. In the Midrash is a Jewish commentary on the Old Testament. And there's a story in there about an old man who's kind of over by the side of the road and he's planting a fig tree. And someone walks by and looks at him and says, do you really expect that you're going to live long enough to enjoy the fruits from that fig tree? And his reply is this. He said, I was born into a world flourishing with ready pleasures. My ancestors planted for me, and now I plant for my children. You know, at some place, God has called us to be strong for the next generation. And I think in our society today, there are so many fewer young people who are going to church. And at some point, someone has to be able to reach out to them. And we may not be able to change the entire world, but we can be responsible for our part of it. We need to be strong for the next generation. That's what Caleb was doing. He said that inheritance, it's not something I'm probably going to enjoy a long time. I'm 85. But I'm making sure my kids, my grandkids have a place. The second thing we learned from Caleb is that we need to be strong for a long time. Look at verse 10. Caleb says, now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said to Moses, while Israel moved about in the desert. So here I am today, 85 years old. I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. I love Caleb's attitude. Dude's 85 years old. And what he's doing, he's not living in the past. He's saying, you know what? Here I am. I'm not weak. I'm ready to go for battle. I'm in that time of life where a lot of my friends are sitting to the side. Not me. I'm ready to go. I'm not dead. There is still stuff for me to do. You know, Caleb didn't just sit around and talk. He got up and he did something. He knew, he understood that there was something bigger out there, something with a purpose, and he was going to be faithful for a long time. You know, Steve Jobs, you may know this story. He was the CEO of Apple. He was recruiting John Sculley to leave Pepsi and come work at Apple. And he famously said, do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world? Tell you what, that's an attitude that we can probably all look toward. When you get older and you retire, what do you do with your free time? Do you sit around and drink coffee, talk about the glory days, or do you say, you know what, there's still something in the future? I grew up in a small town called Hugoton, Kansas, population about 4,000 people. And on the main street, there was a donut shop there. At about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, the place started filling up. It's a bunch of people sitting around, drinking their coffee, telling the stories about what it was like when they grew up. You know, I probably could have done something great if it wasn't for this knee or whatever it was. Telling the stories. And the question for us is, when you get to the place where you retire from work, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? You're going to sit around and drink coffee, tell great stories? You're going to play golf? You're going to watch TV? Or are you going to invest in the lives of people that affects them for eternity? You know, we have some people in our church that have retired. We have some people in their 70s. They do a lot of work around here. They do a lot of volunteer stuff. They've said, you know, I'm going to continue to be active. I'm going to continue to serve. I'm going to serve for a long time until God calls me home. I'm going to be there. And I can always tell a huge difference between the people that are active and doing a lot of things and the people that spend a lot of time watching TV. Because as we get older, our bodies start not working like they used to. But one of the big ways to combat that is to stay active, to stay involved, to have that purpose. And you need to understand the Christian life is not a sprint. It's a long distance, like a marathon. And we need to keep our eyes on the things that are important. 2 Corinthians 4:18, the Apostle Paul wrote and said this, so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. That I think so much of our sight, so much of our focus gets paid attention to what's going on here and what's happening now in this life, instead of focusing on heaven and eternity. Those things are eternal. And you know, the Bible doesn't talk anything about retirement. It's not in there. Nowhere in the Bible does it say, at this age, you just sit back and let everyone come to you and take care of you. It's not there. Now, it may change and we may not go get a paycheck for money, and that's fine, but that means we have more time to devote to God. And the people who sit back and do nothing, they struggle a lot more in the late years of life. Caleb, 85 years old. And he said, you know what? I'm not done. And as a church, I want to let you know. As a church and as individuals, God's not done with you. And the reason I know that God's not done with you is because you're still here. When God's done with you, he'll take you away. But until then, he has something for you to do. And we need to not sit back and just wait for everyone to come and serve us. We need to go out and say, you know what? I need to be faithful. I need to be faithful to God for a long time. The third thing we learned from Caleb is this. We need to be strong by setting new goals. Caleb is talking to Joshua, and he says this in verse 12. Now, give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I will drive them out, just as he said. Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, ever since, because he followed the Lord God of Israel, wholeheartedly. You know, Caleb's attitude was this. Hebron, that's the place I spied out. The first time that we came through and we were spies, that's the place. Let me tell you who lives there. It's the Anakites. The Anakites were kind of like cousins to the Rephaites. The Rephaites are mentioned in Deuteronomy. Their king was a guy named Og. Og was a big old dude. It doesn't tell us a lot about him except for he was the king of this place. Big guy. He had, in the book of Deuteronomy, it says he had a bed made out of iron that was 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. That's a big dude. That's huge. And Caleb's attitude was, okay, the Anakites, they live in this area in Hebron. That's the place I want. I mean, at this point in his life, Caleb could have said anything. He could have, first of all, he could have said, you know what? I'm 85 years old. I have served God wholeheartedly my entire life. It is time for me to go home and just get a little spread, plant a garden, and relax. And that's not what he did. Caleb could have easily said, he could have had his pick of land. He could have said, you know what? I want land that's already taken. He could have had that land. He could have said, I want some land out there that they've got some leftover people there, but they're really easy. That's what I want. But instead, Caleb looked and said, okay, the hardest place, that place with the Anakites, that's the one I want. He set a new goal, and he was strong because of his following God. It was not out of pride of what he could do, but it was faith in God's presence and faith in God's goodness. And honestly, God does not want us to be satisfied with the victories of the past. The Apostle Paul wrote in Philippians chapter 3, verse 13 and 14, he said, brothers, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. Paul writes and says, forgetting what is behind, forgetting the successes of the past, forgetting the failures of the past, I am focused on the goal that God has called me to. And it says that it is straining ahead. And a great word picture of that would be a football game, where the running back or the wide receiver is the goal line is there, and they've got the football, and they're leaping to try and strain ahead to cross that goal line. That's a great word picture of straining toward what is ahead. And then he also says that I press on. And the word press on in the original language means to pursue with intensity. That as a church, we don't say, okay, this is who we are, this is what we've done. As a church, we say, we're going forward. What, God, do you have for us next? What do we strain ahead for? What do we pursue? As a church, I'll let you know. We have some places that we want to start. Beyond just the idea of moving and stuff like that, there are places that we are currently supporting and that we want to support in the future. Places in this world today. Godfrey's Uganda Ministry. Godfrey is a missionary that we support in Africa. He plants churches and runs Christian schools. Another organization we're supporting is called Christian Missionary Fellowship. They're starting a new project in either Peru or Ecuador, and there's some early stuff that is going to be happening in the next several months. Basically, they'll go into a slum area of a large town, and they want to revitalize that. And they want to do it by helping those people there to take ownership of that. And so they'll go and they'll build a building. It'll be a church, a clinic, a school, kind of a combined thing. And then they meet with the people of that community and say, okay, what do we need to do to help you get out of poverty? And so they went to one place and they said, well, we have this huge problem with gangs. Said, okay, all these young boys, these young men, they're getting in trouble, they're joining gangs. Tell you what, let's start a soccer league. And so they helped them to start a soccer league to get those kids something to do. They went to another area. It was a slum, but it was kind of near a resort. And they said the best thing that we can do to get out of poverty is to learn how to speak English so we can go and get those jobs. So they helped them to do that. And so there's the first organizational meeting as they're getting ready to plant this project in either Peru or Ecuador. It's a 3-year project, and we've signed on and said, you know what, we want to be in the ground floor of this. We're helping in Arizona. At Arizona Reservation Ministries, we support missions there that they help build houses, and they put on a Bible school for kids. Here in Phoenix, we help support the Dream Center, helping get homeless teenagers off the street. We support Teen Challenge, which helps drug addicts and homeless people. We support Fountain of Hope, which tries to help get prostitutes off the street in downtown Phoenix. And then in Scottsdale, we want to start supporting some new things. First of all, we want to work with the city. We want to go to the city and say, what are your needs? Where are the places that we can help and serve as a church? We want to adopt an elementary school where we can go and provide physical needs, but we can also provide time and help those kids out. We want to adopt a home for young mothers. We know that there's 3 in this area where there's some young girls who've had babies and don't have a lot of support. So we want to come beside them. We also want to do some things for marriage and strengthening marriages and preventing divorce. There are things that we want to do as a church where we say, you know what, this stuff that we believe about God is not something we keep to ourselves, but we go and we share it in this world and also specifically in this community. That's where we're heading. That's the big goals, the new goals that we are setting for us as a church. But I'll tell you what, it's going to cost something. It's going to cost something from every one of us. First of all, it's going to take flexibility. Because right now we know that the church is for sale and we're looking to where we're going to meet, and there's a potential to meet in a school, get some office space somewhere else. We can't tell you exactly what the picture looks like because we don't know yet. But it's going to take some flexibility where we say, okay, well, here's what we're doing this week. Here's what we're doing next month. Things are going to change a lot. The second thing it's going to cost money. It's going to cost money. At some point, we've got to fund the things that we want to do and support. Our giving this year is kind of on a downhill slope right now. In January, we're giving $6,600 a week. February, March, $7,100. April, $6,700. May, it went down a little bit to $6,200. And in June, we averaged about $4,800 a week. That's an issue. That's a problem. It's going to cause us to have other issues, because what it really comes down to is this. We probably are not going to have to face a lot of physical giants in this country. We don't have to worry about 9, 10, 15, 20 feet tall guys with armor coming up against us. But I think one of the biggest giants that most people face in this country is the giant of finances. Because most of us think that it's just too big to conquer, and we try and handle it on our own, and we fail a lot of times. The giant is just simply this, is trusting God with my finances, giving to Him first. And there's a lot of people that are afraid to do that. And they'll give you a lot of reasons, they'll give you a lot of excuses, but it comes down to, I don't trust God to take care of my financial situation. But if we want to do the things that God has called us to do, it means that we need to be faithful. We need to trust Him in every area of our life, and it's going to cost money. It's also going to cost time and work. You know, if we go and start meeting at a school, then people are going to have to get there early on Sunday morning and do setup, and people will have to stay afterwards and tear down. It's going to look different. It's going to be different. If we're going to minister to the people in our community, that means that we may need to have people that will meet with kids after school during the week to sit down and tutor them. Just go over basic English and basic math, but they just need someone there that cares enough to show up. That means people may have to change their schedules or change their TV viewing habits. But I think probably the biggest thing it's going to take is a good attitude. It's going to be an attitude where we say, you know what, we're unified by this, and we look at the challenges ahead. We look at the work that's ahead and say, you know what, I want to be a part of that. I tell this story, and I will continue to tell this story until the day I die. Probably one of the coolest trips I ever went on was a missions trip to Mexico. We would take the teenagers there when I was a youth minister, and we would build a house. Basically, the families lived in a really bad part of the town. They had they were on the ground, and that's where they lived. They had cardboard or corrugated metal, and just whatever they could put up, that was the shelter that they had. And we would go in, and in a week, we would pour a 20 by 10 concrete slab and build a house on it, a 2-room house. And we would take teenagers there, and as I was talking to the teenagers, preparing them for the trip, I would say things like this. I would say, okay, it's going to be a hard trip. You're going to get dirty. You're going to get hot. It's going to be a lot of work. You're going to be exhausted. And someone's going to do something, or someone's going to say something, and it's going to tick you off. And when that happens and you're just ready to give up and you're ready to start complaining, I want you to just do this. I just want you to smile and say, I like it. And so we talked to them, and I said, I don't know what it's going to be. We're going to break down on the side of the road, or someone's going to call you a name, or you're going to have a bad day. And during those times, I want you to smile and say, I like it. And I'll tell you what, we went down there to Mexico, and on our first day on a Monday, we're building the house with these kids, and the wind starts coming up, and it's hot, and the wind starts blowing more and more dirt, kind of like the dirt storms we get here at times, only this one lasted for hours. And as we take a break for lunch, we're in the van, and we're eating lunch here, and I'm just looking at the dirt blowing out there, and I'm going, my goodness, I can't make these kids go back out and work in this. I mean, it's just nasty out there. But as I'm thinking this, just about ready to say, okay, you know what, let's just call it a day, the kids finished their lunches, they started getting out of the van, going back out and working. And even although the sand and dirt was blowing in their eyes, they took their bandanas and totally covered their faces. So they're looking through the bandanas to hammer and saw and put this building together. And after being out there for 8 hours on this day, we go back to the church where we're staying, and the windows and the doors in Mexico, not sealed up nearly as much as they are here. We had a big old pile of luggage in the corner at the church. As we came in, we looked, and there's just this layer of dirt on all of our luggage. And it's just the last thing in the world we wanted. And tell you what, kids didn't say one word. As we went to go and take showers, they said that there were showers in this church, and there were. I mean, there was this hole in the wall, and some cold water dripped out of it. Not a word of complaint. As we went to bed that night, bunch of people were sleeping on concrete floors, others on wooden church pews, not a word of complaint. The kids all have the attitude of, you know what, let's just smile and say, I like it. As a church, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of hard work ahead of us. There's a lot of sacrifice ahead of us. There's a lot of things that you're going to look at what we're doing as a church and say, I don't like that. And I'm telling you that's going to happen right now, because there's things that are happening at the church that I look at it and say, I don't like that. And I'm one of the leaders. But we could all have the attitude of smiling and say, I like that. Because ultimately, we know what God has done for us. Ultimately, we know what the new goals are that we're trying to accomplish, where we're trying to say, you know what, I'm going to be faithful to God. God has put me here at this time, at this place, to impact this part of the world for Him. I'm going to smile and say, I like it. Caleb said, I'm going to be strong for the next generation. I want to take that hill country, not because I'm going to enjoy it for a long time. I'm 85. But I want to make sure my kids and grandkids are taken care of. So I'm going to be faithful for a long time, and I'm going to be faithful by setting a new goal, and it's the hardest goal out there. It's what God has called us to do as well. But at some point, each one of us has to make a choice. Each one of us has to make a decision. And you know what? I want to be a part of that or not. That's the choice that's out there. There's a church in Portland that got involved in the school because in 2008, Roosevelt High School was doing pretty bad. It was a school that was designed to hold 2,200 kids. It had declined down to about 450 because so many parents were pulling their kids out of the school because it was a train wreck. I don't know how much you know about Oregon, but Portland was the first large American city to elect an openly gay mayor. It's home to the world's largest nude bike ride. The school superintendent of this particular area was openly gay. Just needless to say, it's not a bastion of Christianity. But this church said there's a need out there, and we're going to do something about it. It started with a cleanup day where hundreds of volunteers went through and cleaned and painted and took care of the grounds. Beyond that, people from the church started showing up day after day, week after week, and saying, how can we help? I mean, it got it was such a big deal that after 6 months, the principal of the school approached the church and said, you guys are here every day. You're helping with so many different things. We just need to get you an office here in the school. Forget about the separation of church and state, which isn't there in the Constitution anyway, but forget about that. We're asking the church, we're going to put an office in here because you guys have someone here all the time. And since that church has gotten involved in that school, their enrollment has doubled. The graduation rates have gone better than any other high school in Oregon. Didn't change disagreements about social issues, but people were attracted to the faith of that church because it was something that they were living out. In their town, in their community, in their school, they're saying, you know what? God loves me. God loves you. Let me show you how much God loves you. I'm going to come. I'm going to serve. Even though I don't agree with you on everything, I'm going to show the love of God through my actions. Tell you what, that's the kind of church I want to be. It's the kind of people I think that God has called us to be. I think that's who He wants us to become as a church. Where we are not afraid to stand strong, say this is who we are, this is what we believe, but we prove that love by our actions and living it out in this community. Each one of us has to make a choice whether or not we want to be a part of that or not. There are some here that have not even taken the first step. And the first step is just having a relationship with Jesus Christ. Before you can do all the other things, you need to have that walk with Him. And you may not know exactly what that looks like. And you know what? That's okay. We understand that coming to Christ is a process, and God has brought you here today for a reason. There's something He wanted you to hear or see or listen to. If you want to find out more about what it means to be a follower of Christ, we're going to sing this song here in just a minute. Just ask that you come forward and we'll have you go back and talk with some people in the office. They'll just pull open the Bible and say, here's what it means to be a follower of Christ. So I just ask that everyone would stand up where you are. If you want to talk to someone about being a follower, why don't you come meet me up front as we sing this song.